Welcome to Passages Pulse, where we track the heartbeat of Israel and the Middle East from a Christian perspective. In a time of confusion, division, and misinformation, we're here to help you cut through the noise with truth, clarity, and conviction. Hi everyone, welcome to the Passages Pulse. Today is a special episode. It is Monday, October 13, 2025. It is around 12 p.m. as we're recording this Eastern time on this joyful day, complicated day, but overall I think really happy day. Hallelujah. The hostages are home. The 20 remaining alive hostages are home. This is truly a historic occasion. The first phase of this deal that President Trump has laid out has taken place, and then we hope to see if the war in Gaza is the end of this war in Gaza will come out. So after 737 days, say that again, 737 days, the last living hostages have returned home from the Gaza Strip. There's still a lot of uncertainty about the future. I know you guys have a lot of questions. We do too. We're going to try to break down what we know and then discuss some of the things that we think are going to happen next. But we're so glad that Josiah, my co-host, is here with us today. Josiah, please give us a breakdown of where things stand right now that we have seen these hostages return home.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Sebastian, thank you for your flexibility in having this conversation last minute. You know, we didn't know going into the weekend whether we would have a podcast to record or not. We were just waiting with everyone else with, I think, very eager anticipation and hoping that nothing would go wrong at the last second. Everything would proceed as planned and that the hostages, the 20 live hostages, would come home. And, you know, thankfully we woke up this morning to good news, and we're very excited to be able to record a podcast out of our usual schedule, but a very important one. Sebastian, I'm very glad that you and I are able to sit down and do this. To answer your question about where do things stand right now, it's fairly simple. Phase one is the simple part of the Trump plan, if you will. The IDF withdrew around noon on Friday, Israel time of last week, to the first line that they were required to withdraw to, as agreed to during the negotiations. And then that basically started the clock. Hamas then had 72 hours or noon Israel time today, which they met that clock essentially, to release the 20 live hostages. And as of this morning, again, you know, we woke up to very good news that those 20 live hostages are all not just out of the hands of Hamas, but are actually in the hands of the Israeli authorities and are inside Israel. Many of them, there are even photos and videos of them having been reunited with their families, which are just very, very sweet to see. The hard part, I think, that makes this bittersweet is that you have the 20 families who have received home their loved ones, the live hostages. The people who are still waiting for some confirmation about what happens next are the people who are waiting to receive bodies of loved ones, their loved ones who either were killed on October 7 and their bodies taken into Gaza, or died, or frankly were killed sometime during their captivity in the Gaza Strip. We know today that 4 bodies will come back to Israel. There are another 24 bodies that are unaccounted for or are expected or must be delivered back to Israel at some point, but it's unclear exactly in what timetable that's going to happen because Hamas claims that they're unable to locate and or reach some of those bodies. So there's still work to be done in terms of seeing all of the remains of hostages returned. But for today, at least, I think Israel and friends of Israel can breathe a sigh of relief knowing that the remaining hostages who are still alive are home with their families.
Yes, thank God for that. And we want to remember their names. We want to read out loud the names, and Josiah is going to show some photos. I'm sure many of you have been seeing pictures and videos. The videos just make you cry of joy to see families being reunited. Let's remember some of the names. We're going to read all of them. We have Matan Angres, a 21-year-old soldier who was returned. Praise God for that. By the way, Josiah, as we do this, all of them are men, right? All the 20 remaining living hostages were all men.
Correct. The last of the live female hostages were released earlier this year during that January to March ceasefire in exchange for hostages.
And I guess Hamas held these because they were age-fighting males. Like, they consider them soldiers, even though many of them were not serving as soldiers at the time.
Yeah. As we go through these names, I think you will notice a lot of these people are in their 20s or 30s. And so they were towards the bottom of the list that Hamas was willing to release because they were considered fighting age males, individuals who you will see a few of these names were soldiers or people who Hamas thought were soldiers, even though they weren't. In some cases, you will see a name or two, maybe we'll point them out when we get there, of people who were older, were not necessarily, fighting age, if you will, people who were older, married, had kids, that sort of thing. So we'll try to point them out as we go.
Let's keep going. So the next ones are Gali and Ziv Berman. We actually had their friend Noah Ruveni from Kfar Aza, community that we know very well, that you guys as alumni, we contributed a donation to this community to help them rebuild. And then we had Noah, their friend, come to speak to some of you high schoolers. If you're listening, we did a high school conference in DC this summer, and she spoke about them. And there they are. Praise God, they're going back home with the t-shirts of Maccabi Tel Aviv, their favorite football team from Israel. Thank God for them. Okay. Next one is Elkanah Rokbot, 36-year-old husband and father kidnapped from the Nova Festival, his home. The next one is Rom. I think you guys will recognize him. Rom Braslavsky, 21-year-old kidnapped from the Nova Festival. We have seen his pictures and lately, and clearly you can tell that he suffered a lot. But thank God he's home, 21-year-old. Next one are brothers, Ariel and David Cuneo, 28-year-old Ariel and 35-year-old David, 35-year-old brothers from near us. David returns to his wife and his twin daughters, who were released in November 2023. This whole family was kidnapped, and they have been reunited, released. So praise God for them. Next one is Eviatar David and Guy Gilboa Dalalbo, 24-year-olds who were childhood best friends and were kidnapped together at the Nova Festival. And Josiah, you reminded me also that they were seen last time in this video. Tell us about that real quick.
Yeah, so the first photo you see is Eviatar, and he was famous. Both of them were famous for being used by Hamas for various propaganda campaigns. Eviatar, unfortunately, was, as you can see, obviously starved horribly. He also was recorded digging a hole, or his own grave, in a tunnel in the Gaza Strip. Thank God he's home, and that grave was not filled. You also had previous cases, even before that video was filmed, where he was put in the car with his friend here in this photo. This is a still image from a video, including Guy Gilboa Dalal. These two men were basically taken to the hostage release ceremonies, which were absolutely grotesque earlier this year. They were forced to watch them as other hostages were released, and they were then told, you're not being released, you have to go back into the tunnels, which is a form of psychological warfare and torture in and of itself, that they were forced to watch, to be given a small glimmer of hope, and then to be told, it's not for you, you have to go back to the tunnel. They were unfortunately made famous because of that video that Hamas put out during those release ceremonies.
Yeah. And they were made to say, Netanyahu, stop it, Netanyahu. They're trying to put pressure on Netanyahu that way. So praise God for that they're home. Really great to see them. Very young people here, 21-year-olds, both. We're going to move now to Maxim Herkin. He's a 37-year-old. This was obviously before he was kidnapped with his baby girl there, it seems. He's a father of a young daughter, and he's an immigrant from Ukraine who was kidnapped. He's come home now. Next one is a very special one to me. Is Eitan Horn. Eitan is a 30-year-old brother of Yair Horn, who was released in February. Yair, we had him at our conference in DC this summer as well. He's from Argentina. His family immigrated from Argentina to Israel, and those are three brothers there. They're fans of this soccer club called Hapoel Beersheva in the south, city that I love very much. And he returned home. So Yair was released in January this year after more than 500 days in captivity. His brother remained back there, and here he is. He's back. They're reunited. To me, this is a miracle. So I want to encourage you all, alumni and fellows who did so many events, vigils, everything you did to highlight the story of one of these hostages. You wore the bracelets. You prayed for them. You held them in some of the campaigns that we did for prayer. Here they are. Praise God. God answers prayers, and they're reunited. So really happy to see Eitan reunited. Let's keep going with Nimrod Cohen. He's a 20-year-old soldier. I believe, Josiah, I think the video that I saw from he was captured is that some terrorists surrounded a tank that were in a tank, and it was up in smoke, and he was dragged out of there, and he was kidnapped on the day he was serving at this moment. Isn't that true?
I think that's the correct. Yeah, there are a couple soldiers in this list, but I think that is the correct one.
Yeah, really young people. Okay, so he's back home. Next one is Segef Kalfon, 27-year-old, kidnapped from the Nova Festival. He's back home. Next one is Bar Cooperstein, a 23-year-old kidnapped from the Nova Festival. You can see just how many people were taken for Nova and how many hundreds of people were also murdered there. He's back home. The next one is a little older guy, Omri Miran. He's a 47-year-old father from Nahal Oz. He returned to his wife there. This picture was taken today, just a few hours ago. Those are his two daughters. You guys can take a look at the little one on the right. She's really little. She's probably 2 or 3. And her father has been kidnapped for 2 whole years. He's returning home. I saw his sister's cousin was talking on the news last week how he was thanking President Trump for bringing Omri back. So great to see that. Josiah, you have children in this age. How do you feel about seeing that?
This photo made me cry this morning. It's a lot to take in.
Thank God they're reunited with his daughters. Thank God for that. Next one is Eitan Moore. He's a 24-year-old who was kidnapped from the Nova Festival. I think the picture that you just put up out there was of Joseph Chaim Ohana, who was a 24-year-old kidnapped from the Nova Festival. I heard about his story. He was very brave on that day. He helped his friends. He protected other people, and eventually he was taken captive. That was the last picture we saw was Joseph Chaim Ohana.
I want to stop here for a second, Sebastian. Yeah. So the picture, I'll throw up the picture again in a moment for Joseph because I don't want to just skip over his story. But he and Eitan were both 24 years old and taken from the Nova Festival. There's a lot of videos that we could show of the hostages being reunited with their family members, but we didn't have time to show all of them, so I just picked one that I thought was very sweet, and I'll go ahead and show it in a moment. The video that you're about to see, there is some audio and some sounds of joy. So I apologize if it's a little loud, but I think it's worth just taking in and listening to the sound of these family members being reunited. Again, this specific video is Eitan and his parents meeting in Israel.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. תראו איזה גבר, תראו.
What you're hearing in that video, just before Sebastian, you keep going, is a couple of things. One, obviously some tears of joy, a lot of happiness. You're also hearing Shekyanu, that prayer thanking God for bringing us to this moment where their son comes home, and then some additional FaceTime calls with other family members, extended family or friends that he hasn't been able to see in person yet and might not for a few days. There are so many videos of moments like this where people are just reveling in the opportunity to hug a loved one again for the first time. So we'll keep going.
Highly encourage y'all to go watch some of these videos because it will give you so much hope. Can you imagine this family? Like, they probably had days where they thought, like, we're never going to see our family members again. We're never going to help them. But to be able to bring them back basically from the dead, 2 years without them, is incredible. So that was beautiful. Yeah, and I think a lot of our Passages alumni who've been to a Shabbat dinner with us in Israel recognize that prayer where they bless the Lord, King of the universe, who has brought us to this day. So that was the last one that we went through was Eitan Moore, right? Now,
yeah, so this is Yosef's picture again. And then I think Alon's the next one if you want to tell us.
Yeah, this was Joseph Chaim, who is 24-year-old, returned. The next one is Alon Ochel, a 23-year-old, kidnapped from the Nova Festival. Just so many from the Nova Festival. I remember this guy, he had like long curly hair, big beard. Here he is, he's back. Praise God for that. The next one is Matan Zagwaker. He's a 25-year-old kidnapped from New Oz. I saw a video of him reuniting with his mom. She was just Hagim is him like Chaim Shali, like my life, my life, my life. She's just so overjoyed seeing her son returned. All right, and I think this is the last one. The next one is Avinatan, or who you will recognize with whom he's sitting right there. That's his girlfriend Noah, who was rescued. You guys saw this horrific video of her being taken in a motorcycle, in the back of a motorcycle to Gaza and separated from him. And I cannot imagine what this guy felt like. My girlfriend, woman I love, is being taken away from me, and I can't do nothing about it in my country, in our homeland. And these terrorists are coming here to take her away from me. Noah survived. She was rescued, and he was also free today. He's 31-year-old. She was rescued in June 2024. Josiah, thank you for showing us those pictures. What a joy to see this. What do you have to add? What do you have to say about after seeing all these names?
I think there's a couple things that stand out that are pretty special about these stories, and we unfortunately just don't have the time to tell all of the stories in all the details. But I want to highlight a couple things that are true about many of these people. One, many of these people were heroes of October 7. If you look online, just Google some of these names and learn more about some of their stories. What you'll find is that a lot of these people were made famous by their loved ones advocating for their release. And part of what they told about their stories was that they knew from other victims of October 7 that these people were actively involved in either fighting against the terrorists, to defend others against the terrorists, or to save others, that they were working very hard to evacuate wounded people. Several of these people, especially the hostages taken from the Nova Festival, like many of those people might not have been kidnapped. They might have escaped, except for the fact that they slowed down to help people who had been wounded and help to evacuate wounded before eventually being kidnapped. It's really, really, I think, a very powerful moment to see some of these people who were heroes on October 7 finally returned to Israel and to their loved ones. It's also, I think, very powerful, as we've already touched on, just as a husband and a father, to see the several people who were husbands and fathers return to their loved ones. That really hits deep. It's very impactful, obviously, to see them reunited with people who desperately need them. These men, their families have been telling the world for 2 years now, like, these kids need their father. These wives need their husbands. We have to find a way to reunite these people, and finally that was done, which is just extremely powerful. It does, I think, highlight is again the fact that you have some people who were, there's a couple of cases here, soldiers, they were kidnapped on October 7 from their units, from their base, or from a tank. But the majority of these people were not in uniform on October 7. Even if they were theoretically of fighting age, they were going to a concert at the Nova Festival. They were acting as civilians when they were kidnapped. Or you also have, again, some older cases, an immigrant from Ukraine or a 47-year-old father who clearly were not acting as soldiers, or not even really to be considered of fighting age even per se, and yet they were kidnapped on October 7. So it really, I think, highlights the depth of the atrocities that Hamas committed by kidnapping people, not just by murdering, but also by kidnapping people, and the victims that they chose for kidnapping, but also, I think, the resilience. It's just that much more impressive that most of these people are not professional soldiers, and yet they demonstrated incredible resilience, managing to survive 2 years in horrific conditions in Gaza. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that it, I think, is very powerful to reflect on even the legacy of hostages who have already come out, or of hostages who were killed in captivity. There are a few names listed among here, Omri, Elon, others who at one point or another did come across people like Eli Sharabi, who really, if you have not read his book that just came out last week, it's called Hostage, English translation, came out just last Wednesday. I picked it up and read it right away. It's amazing. And what it highlights is not just the conditions of captivity in Gaza, but the types of relationships the hostages had to their captors and to each other, and the types of relationships they had to form in order to survive, the way that they depended on each other. And in the case of, depending on your captors in some pretty cruel ways, but in the ways that the hostages depended on each other in some very meaningful ways, I think. And some very beautiful ways. And there are hostages who were released today that, honestly, based on the testimonies that we've heard about the role that people like Eli played, or the role that Hirsch played before he was killed, I don't think some of the hostages today would be alive, except for the help that they received from people like Eli or Hirsch. And it's a very, very bittersweet moment, especially for Hirsch's family, to see these people come home, because Hirsch is not with them. So in that sense, it's extremely bitter, but also a very small amount of sweet, because they know that these people would not have come home except for the role that Hirsch played in encouraging them and helping them to survive as long as they did. So there's so many complex emotional layers to what Israel's feeling today. I think it's just important to acknowledge that this is an extremely joyous occasion. It's also an occasion in which there's going to be a few tears, quite a few tears actually, because not everyone is receiving the gift that these 20 families are. And some people have had to pay a very high price in order for this to happen. But I think it is good for us to celebrate and just be mindful of those who are still experiencing very complex emotions in the midst of the celebration.
Yeah, this day is very complex. As I said at the beginning, we're joyful to see these hostages return alive, their stories, the heroism on October 7th, and since then. I heard Dan Sr. talking this morning in the news how he said that more than 900 soldiers have died since October 7th fighting the war. So that's the sacrifice of 900 Israeli soldiers willingly risking their lives to rescue some of these hostages, to put pressure on Hamas, to defeat Hamas, to accomplish the war goals. And it's a high price to pay. This is a very Jewish concept, as we know, as y'all know, when Jewish people get married, in the joyful of their wedding, they break a glass to remind themselves of the temple being destroyed. So in many Jewish holidays, there is this thing of we're joyful, we're so grateful, but at the end, we remember that there's still pain. And so it's a complex day. I think about the deal, Josiah, how there's so many times where like a deal might happen today. Witkoff is going to Egypt. Witkoff is going to Qatar. It's going to happen. But for many different reasons, a deal like this was not possible until today. So let's talk about the deal. We talk about the names. Next, guys, we're going to talk about the deal, how we got here, and then we'll talk about also about the war. Is it over? And finally, we'll talk about some analysis of how we should pray and think about going forward. So let's talk about the deal first. Josiah, why is this deal so miraculous?
I think, I mean, if you ask Israelis, you'll probably get a couple different opinions, but by and large, I would say most people did not see this coming 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. It is, I think, shocking in the sense that we went from negotiations really being put on hold after the Israeli strike in Doha, in which they tried to assassinate the top echelon of Hamas leaders in Qatar, who were negotiating via mediators with Israel for the release of the hostages. You then saw Israel launch an intensive military campaign, or really deepen intensive military campaign in Gaza, one that included Gaza City, which was Hamas's main or largest stronghold left in the Gaza Strip. And you saw all these combined factors gave you no real reason to believe or to hope that there was a hostage deal on the immediate horizon. It seemed like it was going to take some time, that the best hope was that after maybe even a month or 2, 3 months of sustained military pressure in Gaza City, perhaps a deal would be possible for the release of the hostages. But also there was a very real possibility that Hamas would simply kill the hostages if Israel got too close to destroying Hamas in Gaza City. So the fact that this is where we wound up, this did not a few weeks ago seem to be the most likely scenario. And I think that's part of what makes it so important to just recognize the gravity of this moment and where we are today. Things that also I think make it just rather stunning what the deal means is, for example, Hamas has conceded its biggest leverage. The biggest leverage Hamas had was the living hostages. And it has for 2 years tried to give them back to Israel in pieces. And Israel and the United States finally got to a point over the summer where they said it needs to be one deal for all of the hostages, because we're not going to keep playing this game where there are these random ceasefires in exchange for a few hostages, and then you go back to fighting after Hamas has had time to sort of strengthen itself and reposition itself. The fact that Hamas willingly gave up all 20 hostages, living hostages, I should say, in one release is pretty remarkable. And again, I don't think that really was on the table even a few weeks ago. You have to acknowledge that they still hold the bodies of, after today, I think it's going to be 24 hostages who are deceased. So they still have some leverage left, and they're going to obviously, I think, try to use that to whatever advantage that they can. But the fact that the living hostages at the very least are not there certainly means that, you're not operating in a world in which Hamas can say Israel should not be conducting military operations because they might kill hostages, because there are no live hostages left. So from a military standpoint, Hamas has just given up a significant amount of its leverage. Israel has to pay a very high price, but it's also very significant that it doesn't have to leave Gaza in order to secure these hostages. So even if the rest of the deal falls apart and there's not a formal end to the war and Israel has to go back to fighting, it's not as if the war starts over from scratch. Israel has withdrawn, yes, from some positions, but it's maintained control of most of the military installations built in Gaza post-October 7 and is allowed to play a very active role in what security in Gaza looks like, even post the return of these hostages. Something that Hamas has been very strongly rejecting and demanding not be the case for the last 2 years. Israel was able to secure that during the negotiations. So it's not as if you look back at where we were a few months ago, and I mean, I sort of agreed with this, I think, and some of the prevailing wisdom was Israel's going to have to choose between totally destroying Hamas or getting the hostages back, because you can't have it both ways. You can't accomplish both things. And it's still true that Israel has not totally destroyed Hamas, and it's probably not going to as a result of this deal. But this is probably the best possible compromise of the war goals of destroying Hamas and securing or saving the hostages. It's hard to imagine a better scenario, honestly, in which Israel would be able to get all the hostages back without giving everything back to Hamas that it wants, and be able to stay in the Gaza Strip and stay involved in the fight to eventually, hopefully, disarm Hamas. There are a lot of questions about what that's going to look like, but I think at the end of the day, Israel can feel very good about where it is, especially compared to where, a month ago we maybe thought they were going to be in terms of the choices they would have to make between Hamas and the hostages. We could go on and on, but this is a very, very special occasion, I think.
Yeah, I'm impressed by the timeline. If I remember my timeline correctly here, I think around Rosh Hashanah is when the United Nations started convening and all these states started recognizing the state of Palestine, as I think 10 of them did it, as we recognize. Then towards the end of that, Netanyahu came, he spoke, and then next Monday after that, he met at the White House 2 weeks ago from now. He met at the White House with President Trump, and they announced this 20 plan. By the end of that week, Hamas started responding, and here we are 2 Mondays after that. The hostages have been released within 2 weeks. So President announced this 20-point plan. In 2 weeks, it started taking place, the first part of that. So it's really impressive. It's really miraculous, as we said before. So the big question here is about the war. I think we should highlight here, Josiah, can you help us understand? Is this a ceasefire deal or is this a hostage exchange? Is the war over? Tell us about that.
It's not over yet. The fighting is ongoing in some ways, although it looks different, and it doesn't mean that the war can't be over. So it's a little complicated, but I'll just try to break down sort of where we are. This is phase one. So there are several phases of the Trump plan to formally end the war. This is only the first phase. Get the live hostages back. The bodies are also supposed to come back during phase one. So there's going to be some time required to sort out, are they actually going to be able to get that done or not? And then after all that, then you get to some of the really complicated issues of negotiating phase 2 and 3 and so on and so forth. What is going to be required to actually end the war on a permanent basis? Right now, there is no fighting between Israel and Hamas on the Gaza Strip. So it's probably safe to say that this is a ceasefire, not a permanent end to the war, but at the moment it's quiet in Gaza because you're in the middle of phase one, the return of the living and the dead hostages. Some of the questions that still need to be answered if you want to see a permanent end to the war, things like, will Hamas actually disarm? Because you saw when Hamas agreed to the deal that they were putting out statements to the media about what they'd agreed to that didn't necessarily line up exactly with what the Trump plan spelled out or had written out. So they were using terms like, maybe we freeze some of our arms, or maybe we sort of transfer our arms to someone else. And you've seen, even in the last 72 hours since Israel withdrew from its position in Gaza back to a different position in Gaza and allowed Hamas to sort of re-enter certain spaces that Israel had controlled, that Hamas very quickly rebranded its security forces as sort of like a Gaza security forces or something like that. So it's not clear yet whether Hamas actually intends to disarm or is basically going to turn over its fighters and say, we keep our weapons, we rename the security forces we've put together, and maybe we'll try to pass it off as good enough to be in alignment with the Trump plan. I would argue that's not even close to good enough. But those are the kinds of questions that still have to be sorted out, because Hamas is clearly going to try to hold on to as much as they can and give up as little as they can in the next couple of phases. There's questions like, how quickly are these alternative security forces going to be deployed into Gaza? Okay, so you have reports already that CENTCOM is putting some American troops in Gaza in order to oversee the implementation of the Trump plan, but they're not going to be actively fighting. Okay, so the people who are going to be actively preventing any sort of escalation of conflict or preserving order, rebuilding order in the Gaza Strip are supposed to be that international stabilization force or international security force, probably those Arab countries sending troops or police to Gaza in order to provide security in the Gaza Strip. How quickly is that actually going to happen? What sort of obstacles are they going to encounter when they get there? Because I can tell you right now, Hamas at the moment is on a rampage against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Okay, the vacuum that was created when Israel withdrew from some of the areas in which they had been fighting over the last several weeks, especially in Gaza City, is extreme. And now you see Hamas basically carrying out these revenge campaigns in the Gaza Strip against powerful clans or gangs that they accuse of having collaborated with Israel or opposing Hamas during the war over the last 2 years. And this looks like armed clashes. This looks like massacres in family homes. This looks like dragging people out into the street and executing them, field executions as they're referring to them. It's honestly insane how many Palestinians have died just since the ceasefire was announced because Hamas is killing them. And you have Palestinian Authority officials making observations that I think are fair and accurate assessments that what Hamas is doing right now is positioning itself in a way very similar to the way that they did prior to the 2007 conflict when Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip by force and basically took it from force, via force, from the Palestinian Authority and Fatah party officials, many of whom, there are famous cases of them, throwing their opponents off of buildings in a show of force in order to violently take control of the Gaza Strip. And right now, it doesn't seem like Hamas is getting ready to go away quietly. It seems like they're engaging in very similar forms of brutality against Palestinians in an attempt to retake control and to reassert their authority. So those are the kinds of questions, the kinds of things that have to stop if the war is going to permanently end. But it's not clear yet who's going to stop it and when, and how are you going to force Hamas back to the table and say, you can't terrorize Palestinians. You have to go away. You have to give up your arms and go away because you've lost the war. But Hamas doesn't seem like they've realized yet that they've lost the war, or that Trump thinks that they've lost the war. I think you're also going to have to reckon with, Israeli society is going to have to reckon with the Palestinian prisoners, as they refer to them, terrorists, as Israel would refer to them, because they were convicted of, in many cases, terrorism. You're talking about 250 very hardened prisoners/terrorists being released. And in many cases, they're going to be forced into exile. They're not supposed to be sent back to Gaza or the West Bank. But you already have cases where individuals are traveling abroad from Gaza or the West Bank to meet up with these people after they're released, and then talk about what is your reentry into Palestinian politics going to look like, and trying to reintegrate them into the Palestinian national movement. These are people convicted of murder, of rape, of planning or executing suicide bombings. I mean, just horrible things. And symbolically, they're very important to what the future of Palestinian nationalism looks like, what the future of Palestinian politics looks like. Who's going to replace Hamas? Who's going to replace this very old generation of Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian Authority right now? And if these people are brought back into the fold, then that's not a good sign. It's very dangerous. And these are the kinds of things that, again, people are going to have to grapple with. I think on a day like today, we don't really want to think about the future because it's pretty scary, honestly, if you think about the inherent violence that is likely to characterize Palestinian politics for a while. But we do have to be realistic that peace is not automatic. There's still a lot of hard work that needs to be done to get there. And on a day like today, we can celebrate the light in the midst of the darkness. And tomorrow, next week, next month, whenever the negotiations restart, we're going to have to be realistic again about the challenges that are facing Israelis and Palestinians in charting a peaceful path forward, one that has the best interest of both Israelis and Palestinians in mind, because there are a lot of terrorists right now who are still trying to figure out how to preserve themselves and not what's best for Palestinians.
Yeah, let me ask you a quick follow-up to that question, to that issue of the terrorists being released. When they say going abroad, where do they go? Like, do they go to Jordan? Where do they go? If they're not going to the Judea and Samaria or Gaza, where do they go?
It depends. I think some are probably going to wind up in Turkey, Qatar, Tunisia, maybe. I would assume some will wind up in Jordan, but it's unclear how many of the countries that receive those individuals will allow them to stay. Just because your first destination is Egypt or Jordan doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be allowed to stay there for very long. It's a decent chance that some of them are deported and forced to move again to another country in the region. So we'll have to wait and see where they wind up.
Well, I wanted to bring this up later in my prayer points, saying that we should pray for the people of Israel, but let's bring this up right now. I was looking into some of these people who are being released. I'll just mention, I think, three of the worst people being released. One is some guy named Iyad Abu al-Rub. He was involved in 3 suicide bombings during the Second Intifada, 3 separate suicide bombings that obviously he did not do it themselves. He organized this suicide bombings. In June 2003, a suicide bombing in Shamhod Mechola, in 2004 in Tel Aviv, in 2005 in Hadera. He is responsible for killing at least 13 Israelis in these bombings. The next guy is some guy named Mohammad Sakarne. He was from Fatah. He organized the murder of an Israeli taxi driver. Another one is Muhammad Abu al-Rub. Killed a guy in 2017, Ruben Schmerlin. And the last one that I'll mention, actually 2 more. There's a guy who was involved, who was released in the Gilad Shalit deal. So this is the last time that Israel had released prisoners for Gilad Shalit, the soldier who was kidnapped. So this guy was released. His name is Mahmoud Kawashme. And he was rearrested again during this Gaza war because he continues to be involved in Hamas terrorism. And finally, there is a guy who participated in a lynching of 2 Israeli soldiers in Ramallah in 2002. He's very famous, Raid Sheikh. He's known around Israel. He participated in lynching in 2002. And now he's being released. So these are really bad people. I would say the worst of the worst, some of the chief terrorists are not being released. So Israel somehow got that. Thank God for that. But let's hold that prayer point, because I think we should keep in mind that some really bad guys are going to be released or are really released. As we're speaking right now, Israel released all of them. I think it's not exactly 2,000. It's very close. It was like 1,968 who were released. Okay, I have just 2 commentary points here, actually 3, as we're talking about the deal. One, I want to say that military pressure works. Every time that the world, the United States administration started to keep Israel from making some key turning points, such as going to Rafah, such as going into Gaza, like Gaza City. One of the reasons why this deal worked, I think, right now is because Hamas really was backed into the corner. Their last remaining bastion was Gaza City. And I think the turning points of this war for 2 years, such as the Beeper Operation Midnight Hammer, Rising Lion, the assassination of Hamas terrorists such as Mohammed Dave, Sinwar brother, also the attempted assassination of these leaders in Qatar, and the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. These things changed because it started showing Hamas they're not safe anywhere, and Israel was able to eliminate the threat of Hezbollah in the north. So military pressure works, and I think when Israel was given a chance and the weapons they needed to fight this war, we started seeing the tide turning. The second thing I want to say, and as you can hear my accent, y'all know that I am an immigrant, I'm a naturalized citizen, and I'm very proud and grateful to be a citizen of this country. And I think today we should be proud to be Americans. The president of this nation happens to be the person who has a lot of power to yield. And this is what happens when America uses its power for good, when they have a plan, when they engage in the Middle East with a plan. And Trump's plan is the Abraham Accords, having all these nations do economic trade with each other. People who trade with each other usually don't go to war against each other. And I think we should be proud that our nation's president happened to be the person who's brokering this peace deal here. While we see the nations of these other nations, the leaders of the nations who recognize the state of Palestine, as we talked about in the episode, to me, that's recognizing a Palestinian statehood is a reward for terrorism. It's saying you committed the greatest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, so we're going to reward you by recognizing your statehood, such as the leader of the UK, of France, of Spain, of Portugal, Canada, Australia. I think this is a shame on those countries, but we're so blessed that our country has been involved, not for politicking. These leaders that we talked about knew that was not going to change anything. It was not going to improve the life of a single Palestinian by doing that. It was just for their own domestic politics. And by the way, Josiah, as we were talking, I was watching the news a little bit. Trump is in Egypt, and he comes and he's in this summit, and all these leaders come up and taking pictures with him. You guys are going to see the photo ops, like every single one. Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, the leader of Qatar, the leader of France, Macron, they all come up and they take a picture and they want to take credit for this. And even Sturmer from UK was saying that, that we were very involved and we were instrumental in making this happen. And that's a lie. Like, it was the United States who got these leaders in the Arab nations and the Muslim countries like Turkey to make this deal happen. So I think we should be proud of that. And they're taking credit for it, but I don't think did enough to make this happen. So, Josiah, that was my commentary. Let's talk about how we should respond. We should pray, and we've been praying for this. So, what are your first thoughts on how we should respond to this?
Yeah, well, I definitely want to hear what you're praying about, Sebastian, because I think that feels like one of the most appropriate and honestly the easiest way to allow some space to reflect on this is just to pray about it. But there's also two other things I want to bring up that I've been thinking about and ways that I like to sort of process this occasion. One is to just remember those who are responsible, to honor them. I think, to your point, Sebastian, yes, it's good to praise our leaders when they do good. God tells us that government exists to punish evil, to do good. And as Christians, we don't necessarily have to agree with everything that our government does, but it is, I think, right and appropriate that we praise them when they do good. And in this instance, this is an incredible good thing that our government has been a part of. I think you also have to praise the others who played key roles. You have, yes, the White House. You also have other individuals acting on behalf, whether that be Steve Witkoff or Jared Kushner. You have delegations from other countries in the Middle East who, yes, of course, we've had many frustrations with over the last 2 years for their unwillingness or inability, whatever it may be, to put pressure on Hamas. But for better or worse, they finally did put pressure on Hamas. And I think we should honor that and say thank you for finally putting the necessary pressure on Hamas to push a deal like this forward. I think we should be honoring and grateful for the men and women of the IDF who have made tremendous sacrifices in order to see a day like this happen. I think the same applies to the families of the hostages who have just been so inspirational in their relentless, passionate advocacy for their loved ones and never giving up, never losing hope, refusing to give in and to lose sight of hope, and demanding that they have a seat at the table and the opportunity to speak on behalf of those who could not advocate for themselves, those hostages. I think it's an inspiration, and credit is due the loved ones of each of the hostages who have worked very hard to see them come home. Credit is due to the hostages for finding a way to survive for 2 years in those conditions. I mean, my goodness, the stories that I think we're going to hear over the next several months are going to be difficult, but also very inspiring in terms of their ability to overcome difficulty and the resilience that they must have required in order to survive in those conditions. It's just a long list of people I think we need to be grateful for. That's one thing I don't want to overlook, is just the opportunity to sit back and say thank you to all the people within our government, the Israeli government, the mediators, the families, the hostages, the other countries around the region, who all had to play some role in making this happen. The second thing I want to say, and then I'll turn it over to you, Sebastian, to close us out and pray, is that I think it's really important that we take a step back and we say, yes, all these people had to play a role, but I truly believe that they played roles that were being orchestrated by God. And if we don't allow ourselves an opportunity to pause and say, ultimately, this would not have happened without the Lord's intervention. Last week, I think we were discussing amongst ourselves, and I forget if we shared on the podcast or not, but this prayer that the Lord would turn the hearts of men like he turned Pharaoh's heart. And he would work in the hearts of Hamas and their leaders to turn them away from the evil that they were doing in holding these hostages and to compel them to release these hostages. And he did. I don't think there's any other way to explain what happened other than God used human events and institutions and governments, yes, but used them in supernatural ways to produce an outcome that did not seem possible a few weeks ago. And that could only be because of his work and in his role in orchestrating these human events. There's a verse that I wanted to share because it stood out to me. I don't know if this is exactly true or not, but I saw this online. Someone said that the name of the operation to release the hostages, so that basically the efforts, coordinated efforts to receive the hostages home and deliver them back to Israel, was derived from a verse in Jeremiah. I'll put that up here. I think it's just worth reading this for a moment, and then we'll pray, Sebastian. This verse is from Jeremiah 31. I want to say it's verse 16, and it says, "Thus says the Lord, keep your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work, declares the Lord, and they shall come back the land of the enemy. There is hope for your future, declares the Lord, and your children shall come back to their own country. And this, in my mind, just so beautifully encapsulates what we are witnessing today, that the Lord is rewarding the hard work of so many people, that he is declaring in his sovereignty that his people will come home back from the land of the enemy, the captivity that they've endured for 2 years, and that there is hope for the future. I mean, honestly, we've talked a bit about today, there's so many complicated questions about what happens next. But on a day like today, I think we have reason to hope, not because we have all the answers or because any of our leaders have all the answers perfectly figured out, but because we know that the Lord has promised there's reason for us to hope in the future, and that he has rewarded the hard work that has been done to save his people and to bring them home. I think it just gives me tremendous hope and confidence about whatever happens next, it will be okay, because the Lord is working, as is very evident on a day like today when these people have come home to their families. So those are my thoughts, Sebastian, but please close us out with your prayers.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Definitely, we prayed about this. We talked about this, and God finally arranged a very difficult thing to happen. We haven't talked about this, but I don't think so. For instance, we saw even Qatar, as part of this deal, part of what the president has been working with them, has even evidently changed its tone on Al Jazeera, their news outlet, has apparently fired a lot of people there, it's cleaning out the house, and even they have toned down the anti-Israel rhetoric. It just seems like the relationship that President Trump has with the leader of Qatar has even worked in this way, that honestly, they had the biggest leverage on Hamas. And it finally, the Lord moved the hearts of the people who had to be moved to make this deal happen. So I'm grateful for that. I want to start by, you guys are wearing this shirt that says Christians stand with the Jewish people. Many of you have this shirt because we all started in November 2003. About 750 of us, passages, friends, alumni, and friends of alumni, family members, we went to Washington, D.C., and we marched on Washington with like more than 200,000 people who were there that day, asking for the release of the hostages. And I just want to thank you all. Thank you again, alumni. Thank you, friends of passages, for everything you've done for the last 2 years, for praying, for showing up to vigils, to doing events at your church, you're bringing speakers to your church, to your campus. So grateful for all of you. And thank you that we have seen these prayers answer. I think, like I already said earlier, we should pray for the safety of Israel. Israel, unfortunately, we have seen this cycle where there is an intifada, there is a second intifada, there is a disengagement from Gaza, then Hamas comes to rise. So there have been this cycle of violence, and we don't know what's next, but we know that people are evil and people hate the Jewish people, and we need to pray for the safety of Israel, especially as I mentioned before, so many of these hardened terrorists are being released. Pray that they will choose to give up terror and see that it doesn't work, that what they got is the destruction of Gaza. And so I hope that we should pray that the Lord will change the heart of these terrorists, turn their heart away from evil, and that Israel will be kept safe. We should pray for the families of the slain hostages, as many of us are happy to see families being reunited. Many of them are going to receive the remains of their family members. Some of them have been delayed. Apparently only 4 have been released today. So their pain, they haven't had closure. This thing has not ended for them. They're going to keep longing for the ability to bury the loved ones. And in Judaism, this is very important, y'all. In Judaism, they really believe in burying their people in the land of Israel. And many of them do have hope for the resurrection. As we have all been to the Mount of Olives, we see all the tombs there because they have hope in the resurrection. And then finally, I think we should pray for our country and even for the world. I think this Gaza war was used as an excuse to just bring so much instability, disorder, protest, just chaos around our country, around our campuses, our communities, and the world. Pray that now that this is over, the people who have been calling for a ceasefire for 2 years, I don't know what they're going to do now, but I hope that that this will bring peace and stability to our nation. And one final thought. I hate to be a Debbie Downer here, but we heard some news last week that Qatar is going to be given the opportunity to apparently co-build an Air Force base in Ohio with the United States here in America. That makes me really uncomfortable. I'm very uncomfortable to see these ties between the United States and Qatar, which is a very problematic country. I have a lot to say about that. I'm concerned about that. I appreciate that Donald Trump is doing this deal, which is a very difficult deal, but I'm afraid for the price that we might pay for our security, our independence long term. So let's pray for our country. That's what I can think about right now. Josiah, thank you for being with us. Any last words before we go?
It's a good day.
It's a good day. It is good, y'all. Let's praise the Lord. Miracles are possible. Can't wait for the opportunity that when we get to go to Israel next and experience Israel now. So we're looking forward for this winter season. Many of you are applying and in your process of coming to Israel with us. So I just want to thank you all for being engaged with us. Let us know if you have any thoughts, any favorite stories, any questions in the comments. I want to thank very specially our producers, Lindsay and Avery. Thank you for making this podcast happen. And then we'll see you guys in the next episode of the Passages Pulse. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Passages Pulse. Help us grow this community by liking, sharing, and subscribing. If you like this week's episode, let us know by leaving a comment below. This podcast is a project of Passages Israel. We exist to educate the next generation of Christians on modern Israel, deepen the roots of their faith, and equip leaders to foster positive Christian engagement with Israel and the Jewish people. To learn more about Passages, follow us on social media or visit us at passagesisrael.org. Until next time, we'll keep our finger on the pulse.